Brad Skaar grew up on a purebred Charolais operation in Colorado and received his undergraduate degree in animal science from Colorado State University. He then received his Ph.D. in beef cattle breeding and genetics from Iowa State University. He started his career as a livestock extension specialist and has created and taught numerous courses while at Iowa State. Most recently, courses in beef production, cattle business management, and contemporary issues facing animal agriculture, as well as introductory animal science. He's also coached livestock and meat animal evaluation teams for many years. Skaar and his wife Julie live in Story City, Iowa, just north of Ames, and they have 3 grown sons, 2 daughters-in-law, and 6 grandchildren. So it's really an honor for me to be here. It lists that Brad coached livestock and meat animal evaluation teams, and I are one of his students. Now, he started really young. Iowa State was hiring some 15-year-old extension specialists back in the day, and so we've known each other for a long, long time, and it's really an honor. Brad has very high standards in the classroom and has really been the glue that's held the animal science teaching department together at Iowa State for a lot of years. So please join me in welcoming Brad Skaar.
Thank you. All right. I've got a microphone. Good. My gosh, those lights are bright, aren't they? I can't tell there's anybody in the room. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's a real pleasure to have Eric introduce me because, yes, we have known each other for more years than we probably should admit, Eric. Eric is very kind to come down and give a guest presentation in my beef production class every semester and does a fabulous job, as has Bill Bullard. And we've had speakers mention today the powerful impact that guys like Eric and gentlemen like Bill Bullard and others within the RCAF organization have on the education of young people in places of work like mine. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate their input. And to jump ahead on my slides a little bit, I can't tell all of you how much I appreciate RCAF giving them the opportunity to come down and address the students that we work with every day in places like Iowa State University. So I really do very much appreciate the organization in many ways, not the least of which is the contribution they make to the young people who will be taking over this industry from people like us, for the most part, pretty soon here, right? And so that brings me to the topic that I want to address with you today. Now, I admit that the title I put in the program, it was a good title. Jaden actually asked me for a title. I didn't know what I was supposed to talk about yet. So I said, well, let's run with what's at stake. That's pretty flexible. And then I started trying to figure out what to put together for you. And I ended up changing the title a little bit to, let me come back to that title slide. There it is, called Let's Beat the Odds. And I guess I settled on that because as I was trying to formulate this little presentation for you, really with the intent of talking about a little bit about what my world looks like as a university teacher, someone who teaches beef production classes and works at a large land-grant university, right? Our job in a big way is to try to produce the next generation of leadership in an industry like the beef industry. So I was trying to go down that pathway and put these thoughts together for you. And I found there were 5 numbers that actually kind of surfaced to the top of this presentation. And they looked like a lottery ticket. I thought, well, that'll work. Let's go with that. So I changed it to Let's Beat the Odds. And maybe you'll see what I'm getting at by the time I get done. But I'm really focusing on things in my world that relate maybe a little bit to the next generation of leadership and management that will be coming down the road for us in the beef industry. So the first number that surfaced in this presentation I was putting together was the number of 17. And it's kind of a two-sided coin. That number actually came up twice. When I teach beef production, the very first half an hour that we're together every semester, I point out to the students at Iowa State, I say, look, And I usually have 100 to 120 students per semester in beef class. And I'll say, it isn't worth our time and your intuition money if we can't first identify that the industry that we want to spend the next 15 weeks talking about isn't both significant and viable. I said, I want to try to make the case for you throughout this semester that the beef industry that we'll be talking about is significant and viable. And that's where the number 17 comes from. But before I get to that, I start with a quote in beef class. I just pasted the slide right on top. First of all, the beef industry that we're going to talk about is a big deal. It's a big deal to all of us in the room. It's a big deal to the country. I would like to argue it's a big deal to the national security of the United States of America. And the reason for that, to begin with, is that our own United States Department of Agriculture claims that cattle production is the most important agriculture industry in the United States of America. That's a big statement. That's a big claim for a government agency to make when we have so many different agriculture industries in the United States that have such a presence in our livelihood, right? And so for them to come out and say that cattle production is, in the very first line of their webpage, says that is the most important agriculture industry in the United States. So I asked the question to the students, I say, why did they say that? Well, to begin with, agriculture is about 5 to 5.5% of the gross domestic product in the United States of America. I guess that's no surprise. People need to eat and have clothing, right? But 5% of the giant gross domestic product of the United States of America is a pretty big number. What's surprising is that beef cattle is 17% of that gross domestic product. 17% of the receipts generated in agriculture is beef cattle industry alone. 40-some% of animal protein, cash receipts produced by the animal industries, is the beef industry. So I guess when you start to look at that, you realize, yeah, we really are kind of a big deal. We're a very big deal. It's even more impressive to me when you start to look at some side comparisons, the fact that depending what resource you want to reference, somewhere between 720 and 800,000, this whole beef industry is built on 720 to 800,000 different beef operations. 35% of all farms claimed as farms in the United States of America have beef cattle to some extent. The average herd size is rather small, isn't it? That only just simply reminds us that 96% of the beef cattle operations in the United States of America are truly family owned. Not family named, corporately structured, but family run, family operated industries, which is a unique feature really for our beef cattle and sheep industries compared to our friends in pork and poultry and so forth, right? And even to some extent dairy. 96 are family owned. So yeah, the beef industry in the United States is truly a big deal. That's not a surprise to anybody in this room. This also probably isn't a surprise to you because I think a lot of you are living this reality right now. Here's the other side of that coin, that other 17 that kept surfacing in my lottery ticket. Doing a little review work on some of the survey work that's been done by the United States Department of Agriculture, the Census Bureau, and so forth, we learned that between 2017 and 2022, it'll be interesting to see what the next survey brings out. Beef farms, claimed as beef farms in the United States, have also declined by 17%. So not only is the United States beef industry a big deal, but our United States beef industry is under a lot of pressure. Again, no surprise to anybody in this room. Similar patterns in sheep and some other animal industries, but not nearly to the extent of threat under pressure that our United States beef industry is experiencing. And that really, brings concern, depending if you're a producer or an educator in the beef industry or just concerned about the national security of the United States of America, right? Here's the second number that comes up in my lottery ticket, and it's the number 58. Once again, not really a surprise to many people in the room. We look at United States Census and survey data. All kinds of surveys, all kinds of references discover that the average age of the United States cattle producer right now is just a little bit over 58 years of age. 58 years of age is getting close to a time when some people would like to turn over the reins of the management of that business to someone younger, right? In fact, several more recent surveys have indicated that 40% of the beef cattle producers in the United States are well over 60 years old. I've got one survey I'll show you in just a second. 20% are over 70 years of age. I don't know about you, but 70 years of age is it's a little more difficult to throw hay, dig ditches, irrigate land, whatever brings your way, right? And so we start to think about who's going to take over the reins for us. And I think that's why I'm here, is because I'm in the business of helping train the people who take over the reins from people, no matter where your corner of the industry is. Combined with that, to bring a little bit of additional perspective, a more recent publication by our government indicates that in those same 5 years, 213,000 fewer farmers, now these are farmers in general, not just cattle producers though, that range between 45 and 64 years of age. 45 to 64 is kind of the peak time frame of when folks really are in that management leadership role in an industry like agriculture. And we've seen a significant decline, a significant increase in the older age groups of those who run our industries, and a significant decline in the number of young people who are interested in taking that over at that age group. Our folks in the Angus industry developed and did a really nice survey here just a couple years ago. It was among their readership through Angus Media, but it was facilitated by the good folks down at Catifax who did a lot of the statistical work. And they just surveyed this large number of readers. Admittedly, they were a little bit bigger than the average beef cattle operation that maybe we would see across the country. But they've discovered that 60% of feedlot owners are well over the age of 60 years of age. That only an additional 20% were over 70 years of age. And a little bit concerning maybe is that only 70% of the readership that they surveyed were under 40 years of age. Again, back to my world, that's the young people that I work with. Primarily 18 to 25-year-olds, admittedly not 40, but where's the next generation of leadership and management coming from? We also discover from that survey and many others just like it in recent last couple years that maybe a little bit more than only a third of the beef cattle producers in the United States of America have a written succession plan. I actually see this a lot in my beef class where we talk to young people about what do you plan to do when you get out of college? And we have this conversation, and the usual answer I get is interesting. Well, mom and dad think I'm coming back to the beef farm. Isn't that an interesting choice of words from a college student? They're not saying what they plan to do. They're answering my question by telling me what they think mom and dad are planning on. But it isn't perhaps really what's going to happen. So we interestingly have a little bit of a disconnect. It's kind of related to the succession planning, right? Succession planning is a big topic in our industry. And we see a lot of magazine articles and podcasts that address this all the time. The folks with Angus Media also surveyed cow-calf producers, quite a number of them, and they asked them to additionally kind of comment on what are some of the things that are of greatest concern to you as you look forward to the functionality of your beef enterprise, and the answers are not surprising. The largest numbers, they were concerned about the costs of input. That makes sense, especially land, especially where I'm from. The impact of government regulation surfaces as one of their biggest concerns, and that caught me by surprise as I was thinking about coming to RCAF. I thought, if all of you are that concerned, then why are you not here? Right? If that's a big deal, this is where we address those things. And so I think that's interesting. Profitability, okay, no surprise there. Weather, good point. I think what really surprised me about the Angus survey, though, was the next two lines. Not that 36% of those respondents in the cow-calf side also don't have a written succession plan, right? But when asked what items were of least concern to them, way down on the bottom of their concern list were access to credit, okay. Market access, really? When's the last time you had 40 headed cows at home and tried to access a market competing against somebody that had 1,000 head of cattle to sell? This group knows that answer better than I do, right? So I was surprised to see that, and I wonder how they get their calves sold. And then the one I put in red, because that's my topic for today, was of least concern to this age group was farm succession. Really? when only 38% of you have a written succession plan and a apparent disconnect between what you expect and what your young person, your child, if you will expect to do when they graduate from college or move on. It so much is in contrast that even the folks with Angus Median said that that is what they would have termed as a major risk factor for the viability of the industry, the other thing that I talk about students with in class. To go on with that, the Livestock Marketing Association, I think they just finished their meeting here a couple days ago down my way, state that we have a concern about who's going to be able to take over this industry that we've talked about, right? Pulled a quote from their webpage, and they've done a lot of nice writing and work on it. And they said it's about opportunities. The lack of opportunities is a critical threat to the livestock industry and to our nation's food supply. That brings me back to national security, right? They go on to talk about next gen, and I notice now that that's a term we see a lot in like Drover's Journal and Beef Magazine, Successful Farming. Drover's Journal's been running a series of articles as we speak here this month on next generation leadership. I thought that was pretty timely for me anyway. In their particular case, the LMA suggested that our next generation of leadership faces some really significant challenges in order for them to take over this industry that we're concerned about. Yes, costs of resources, but also they may get to play recreation, right? Land that's been sequestered off for use for recreation rather than food supply. Land development for all kinds of reasons, conservation reserve programs, they cite specifically the challenges associated with overregulation. And while those are really important topics that get me off a little track from my requested intent today, which is the replacement of leadership, and I found it really interesting that the Livestock Marketing Association would point specifically at the replacement of leadership in the beef industry as a critical threat to our nation's food supply. Okay, brings that back to home a little bit. So I thought, let's go down the path of replacing leadership. And by leadership, I think what we're talking about is developing programs and opportunities and education systems that capitalize on developing new leaders who share the same kind of passion for this industry that you and I share, right? There are a lot of good examples of where groups are trying to go down this path. One that I'm familiar with is the Iowa Cattlemen's Association has a young leadership program. I know many states around the country have similar programs. Those are really important. They focus on getting our young people in front of legislators, facing current contemporary issues, really talking about some of these challenges and lack of opportunities to bring them into the industry as the next generation of leadership. Okay, great. We'll come back to that, but when I was thinking about programs like that, I thought, leadership's a little bit more than just exposure to legislature. It's more than the sciences and the mathematics that we teach in my shop. There's a little bit more to that than just that. So I was doing a little more reading and kind of came across some survey results I found of interest that our good folks and friends out at Purdue University publish every year. The folks out there in their ag econ department take a strong look nationally at the jobs that are available for graduates in agriculture from our colleges and universities. And what they do is characterize what are some of the demands that employers are making of these new hires. And some of those job descriptions have keywords that are not surprising to us. We would like to hire people who have experience. Okay, makes sense. Kind of hard to get experience when you're 18. Unless you grew up on a farm, right? They found education of value. Glad to hear that in my business, right? But I highlighted two up there that kind of focused in on probably why I was invited to come here today. Those employers at Purdue University all tell them that in these job announcements that our graduates are jobs that they're taking when they graduate from college, that communication skills in a variety of forms were an important part of that job. Okay. 69% of the job openings in agriculture across the United States list communications and public speaking skills as abilities that are important in the people that they hire. And then kind of related to that, teamwork and critical thinking and some things. Those collectively we tend to call durable. We used to call them soft skills. We call them durable skills now. Those kinds of skills that transcend all kinds of jobs and that we would like to think universities and colleges do a good job of strengthening. So that brings me up to one class that I teach. I need to make a reference. This particular class we invented a few years ago. It's called Addressing Issues Facing Animal Agriculture. The class was created because we did the same survey at Iowa State. We reached out to our employers of our graduates and said, what do you think of these kids? How are we doing? What things do we need to change? And our employers told us very specifically that our students coming from our university, and I don't think it's different for any of the good land-grant universities around the country, that we're doing a really good job in training students in the sciences, and in mathematics, in chemistry, in physics, maybe even in some business and management skills too, although that gets a little beyond animal science, the department that I work in. But on the other end of that spectrum, which brings me to the class, those employers told us that where we're really weak, our graduates are insufficient in their communication skills, just like what Purdue says every year. They have a real inability to communicate. Well, there were a group of us that sat around that and looked at that a while and said, boy, we just don't see that. We don't understand what they're telling us. So we went back to those employers and said, tell us a little bit more detail what you're looking at. What they told us was it isn't that their graduates have an inability to communicate, it's they have an inability to argue and to sell and persuade, which is a lot of the industries that are trying to hire them. They can communicate, but they lack an ability to provide a persuasive argument of some kind. As an interesting side note, we never saw those comments made on employees who were members of judging teams. Isn't that interesting? But for the vast majority of our students who are not members of judging teams, they said our students really lack an ability to provide a persuasive argument of some kind. So we designed a class to strengthen those skills. We address all kinds of issues facing animal agriculture of all kinds, but we asked students to specifically strengthen their skills in persuasive argument. I share this quote with you because I think it carries a lot of weight in a lot of directions, but it's a quote that I put on the syllabus. It's one that I ask them about on their final exam. It's something that we operate on throughout the semester. It actually comes from a 1909 play that I think was written by Bernard Shaw. It's called Misalliance. Really was a play about the plight of women in Victorian England, actually. But the line, I think, is the line from the play really carries a lot of weight for a class like mine. And I think it carries a little weight for the actions of groups like RCAF. Because in that play, he said, men are not governed by justice, but instead are governed by law or persuasion. When they refuse to be governed by law or persuasion, then they have to be governed by force or fraud or both. And I think there's a lot of weight in that line. I basically built an entire course around that line from that play, to avoid the situation where our upcoming graduates are governed by force and fraud, but instead find their role in society being a part of the persuasive argument in defense of their industry, which I perceive to be exactly what RCAF does. So I thought you might find that of interest. And that's where guys like Bill Bullard come in, right? Because as has already been noted accurately so, he's really good at this. He is really good at this. And I don't just say that because Bill's here somewhere and we want to puff up his ego, which I'm sure he doesn't have one, but he truly is an example of what we mean by someone who can very eloquently communicate in persuasive argument. So I ask him every semester to come down and address our class. And what I ask my class to do is not only listen to the content of his speech, the issues that he's addressing on behalf of the beef cattle industry, but Bill may not even know that, but a lot of the homework that comes in the next 2 weeks after he leaves is, why was he so effective? What are the skills that he employed? What are the techniques that he employed to convince you that this industry needs some change? What was he trying to persuade you to do? What were his argument styles? And so Bill is an excellent example of someone that we can study in the industry. And so once again, I thank RCAF for providing that tool to me as a teacher, right? Now, to be fair, Bill's not the only one that we have come down. So to emphasize the point of the class, we have Bill Bullard, but we have, for example, Allison Rivera from the NCBA to bring their perspective on some of these important, difficult issues. Preston Moore is the Iowa director of the United States Humane Society. I think they're called World Humane or something like that. Now they changed their name. That one catches a lot of people by surprise. And I'm thrilled to ask somebody like that to come down. Governor Terry Branstad was the ambassador to China. He pops up on a regular basis and presents things on issues that were challenging for him in that role. The whole point of bringing in this array of really fine speakers is kind of pretty well stated by Aristotle again, and throughout the course we make the point. It's the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without necessarily accepting it. And if there's something that maybe I think we do well and that we could do better as an education system, a public education system, is embodied in that quote. We have to help young people use the tools that we're providing them to create an educated mind, but one that's willing to entertain a thought without necessarily accepting it. Then we have truly an educated person. Third number that I got to provide for you here is 15. So now I'm talking about the demand required of leadership in the beef industry. If you've got an economic mindset, you got to think a little bit about what is the supply of leaders that can take over this beef industry. And that brings up a kind of a concerning thought. I'm wondering if many of you in the room have heard of something called the enrollment cliff. This has been predicted for quite a number of years, ever since what we would call the Great Recession back in 2004, plus or minus somewhere in there, where interestingly, for reasons beyond me, the birth rate in the United States declined rapidly. But what that means for us now is that we're going to see a significant decline in the number of students who are entering high school every year and getting ready to graduate. In fact, in the next few years, we expect a 15% decline in the number of graduates out of high school, and that trend will continue all the way out to 2040. What that simply means is we have a significant number of young people in the United States, whether it be in the agriculture industry or otherwise, that just simply are not born. And so we have a much smaller supply to select from. It has universities very nervous because we now anticipate tremendous declines in enrollment in our education system, right? If you're interested in Iowa State a little bit, there's a kind of another layer to that concern a little bit. These are the enrollment statistics for my College of Agriculture in Ames, Iowa. I don't know if it's any different at other universities. I had access to this data. I think you might find some of these numbers a little bit interesting. We're in Iowa. It's a farm family state. So 40% of the, well, to begin with, we have about 3,100 and some students in the College of Agriculture. It's a pretty big college. We have about 943 students in the department that I work with, just in the animal science major. 40% of those kids come from a farm, but only 26% intend to go back to the farm or even a related industry. It's about 24% of our kids express an interest in beef cattle, but I presume that many of those do not plan to go back into the industry or to take over the family cattle operation. We don't know those numbers exactly. So that kind of layers on top of that decline of 15% of students in the first place. If you're interested, the largest interest in my department in the state of Iowa is dogs and cats, followed by beef cattle, thankfully. After that, horses, and I thought you might find it interesting. And after that, when you ask students what they're coming to animal science for at Iowa State, exotics. We don't teach classes in exotics. And then sheep and goats. And guess what comes after that? Swine. In Iowa? I mean, we're, right, ground zero for pork production in the entire world. And it's not even in the top 5 list of students that are coming to animal science at Iowa State University. A byproduct, I would suggest, of the decline in the number of family farm hog operations that produce children who have interest in swine, who ever expect to come back into the industry and raise swine. Could the cattle industry be headed in the same direction? Don't know. But it happens, right? At a place like Iowa State. You might find it interesting, too, 82% of my department are women. 15 years ago, when I was teaching that same class, I would look into the room and I would have to work to find a woman sitting in class out of the 300 students I might have sitting there. Now I have to work really hard to find a guy. Interesting side note, they tend to all sit in the back. So while we're on that topic too, there's this kind of disconnect a little bit in expectations. I'm a baby boomer. I'm going to guess most of us in the room are baby boomers. You can answer that one way or the other. And I'm going to make a little comment about Gen Z. Glad the FFA chapter is here. Don't be offended. I'll cover you in just a second. 71% of those surveyed by a successful farming survey not very long ago said that 71% of those in the cattle business in the baby boomer era of that age group, 65 and up basically, believe that a child would come back and take over the cattle operation. When in that same survey, when they surveyed Gen Z, that would be the students that are getting out of high school, say up to around 25 and plus or minus in there, right? Only 54% of them answered the question in the same way. It's about a 16 to 18% difference in opinion of whether or not that young person will be coming back to that beef cattle operation. Most of the kids that were surveyed in this said, yeah, I really like agriculture, but I'm not real interested in going back to the farm. Why? I want a steady check. I want more money. They can get more money. They can get a more steady income than farming. They know it, right? And they don't want the startup and risk and other factors that go along with getting started in a beef cattle business. So there's a pretty significant disconnect of understanding between generations. So that brings me up to my fourth number, 49, right? And I'll make this quick because I'm going to run out of time here. 49, I made this statement. If you haven't noticed, the next generation of leadership's a little bit different than maybe what you were used to, and I'm talking to the boomers now in the audience, right? You were probably expecting the young man on the left. He's our beef farm manager at Iowa State University, Dave Brini. You were probably expecting most of those kids to look like this and think like this. But actually, the majority of students I work with now who plan to take over the beef business at home look like the person on the right. I asked her if I could take her picture. She was sitting there waiting for beef class one day, and I said, hey, Caitlin, can I take your photo? Yeah, sure, why? And I said, I'm going to use you in a talk in front of 500 people. Okay. What I liked about the photo is, look what she is. Okay, first of all, she's a she. Secondly, she's got a laptop, a cell phone, and an energy drink. And she's not wearing boots, and she's not wearing a cowboy hat. And she's one of my best beef students I had last semester. She is truly going to go back and take over beef cattle business. But she's different, right? She's different than what the expectations are. I have a very funny clip that I don't have time for, so I'm going to skip it. But if you get a hold of the slides that I invite you to watch it, I'm going to skip it here real quick. It's very funny. I'm going to go ahead and say that, yeah, Gen Z is a little bit different, A real recent survey put out by Insight.com and communicated through Brandon Matthews' podcast indicated that in general, not just agriculture, 60% of the companies, this is over 1,000 companies surveyed in the United States, found themselves firing at least one person of the Gen Z recent graduate, less than a year of employed in 2024. Real disconnect between boomers and Gen Z. The reasons that they cited, they said the Gen Z generation, fourth highest on the list, lacked understanding of what it means to be in the workplace. All right, didn't meet their workplace expectations. 78% of employers said Gen Z uses their cell phone too much. I doubt that surprises too many people in the room, right? Number 3 was lack of professionalism. Interesting. Especially relevant was timeliness, showing to work up on time, staying at work the full time, dependability, and even a little bit of comment on dress. Number 2, not surprising to me, were communication skills, as mentioned before, and a lack of understanding of what formal versus casual communication skills entails. And then, specifically cited many times, a lack of understanding of what it takes to make a sale or to persuade others, which we've addressed already. And number 1 on the list is just simply an innate kind of lack of motivation or maybe initiative. Well over 50% of those employed said that that was the biggest reason why they fired that generation, right? So it sounds like I'm being really critical of young people. I happen to disagree with the conclusions of this study. I don't think that our young people graduating right now necessarily lack these skills, but they apply them in different ways. They have different expectations, and there's probably a real lack of two-way communication going on. What is it exactly you require of me in this job setting is probably not being done. We just expect them to fit a mold, right? So it reminds me that got to work with people where they're at. We got to remember too that our Gen Z generation is really different in positive ways. They're extremely entrepreneurial. They are tremendously inventive, and they are highly innovative and creative in the things that they do. They expect to apply those skills. Secondly, they are technology experts. Is there anybody in the boomer generation in this room that hasn't handed their cell phone over to a young kid and said, here, fix this, right? Do that all the time at my house. They need to have a strong social media presence, and the reason for that is because they have to have interpersonal relationships. They thrive on interpersonal relationships. They don't read extension publications. They don't read magazines. They don't read Angus Media. Not this age group. They get their information from personal connections, either through social media or one-on-one. That's why it's absolutely thrilling that you folks from the FFA chapter are here today. We're thrilled because we know you operate well that way. They hate being told what to do without an explanation of why, right? So as managers hiring people, you have to explain more, take more time. Why do we fix the fence this way? Why do we have water here, right? They have a real deep innate need for that. And they want a career that's meaningful and has an impact on society. They want to be able to tangibly recognize that, but they are not at all interested in being ladder climbers. They could care less if whether you had a master's or a Ph.D. or even a bachelor's degree. They could care less if your title is CEO or a farmhand, as long as the work that I'm doing is meaningful. And so understanding the difference in attitude, working with young people, creates a better set of leaders for the next generation, right? Brazil's got this figured out. Here's an article from a very recent survey done in Forbes magazine where they commented that farming is hip in Brazil, where a new generation is outpacing the US, and they make the statement, now Brazil has a new tool in its bid to unseat American agriculture, and they call that tool Gen Z. And the reason is because, as stated in the other items over there, Brazil agriculture industry has seemed to figure out how to make agriculture exciting, technology-oriented, progressive, and to meet all the needs of Gen Z, where perhaps in the United States, we haven't moved as rapidly down that path yet. And it probably behooves us to do so very rapidly, or we will lose an entire generation of leadership, maybe in the beef industry. We just simply have to understand where our young people are at, what their interests and what their talents are, and how to foster that, like any good manager would do, right? It isn't that we're not doing it in the United States. We have producers that are being featured, and like I said, in Drover's Journal every week, it seems like every day, producers that are talking about the innovative ways and the processes that they're following to transfer the generation of ownership in a beef operation, how they're incorporating high technology. We had a sponsor of our dinner last night that brings technology to the table, real impressive. That kind of thing is the future of the beef industry for young people in the room, right? So to finish up, because I'm well over time and I'm going to get really in trouble now with Jaden, I wanted to end and just simply say, okay, what does this mean? Well, if we're, as an industry, we've got to figure out how to create enthusiasm. We got to stay positive with this age group. We got to create young leader programs like I talked about that bring them into this industry, bring FFA chapters to meetings like at RCAP. Got to remember that they focus on relationships. We have to be willing to make that relationship with them. Don't expect them to read about what we want them to do. They have to partner with educators, and we've got to figure out how to create access to resources, which is a little bit out of my wheelhouse, right? Secondly, if we're in higher education, I could spend all day on this one. We have to do a lot better job at communicating the value of the degrees that we offer. We have to really assess the impact of those degrees. If you come to me as a parent and you say, what do you do? I have to be able to tell you what I do, and I have to be able to prove that it gets done. And I'm not sure we're very good at that, okay? So that's something we need. So we need to refocus the curriculum to better serve this age group. We need to facilitate maybe education store concept rather than degrees, because we're working with young people that less and less all the time care about the degree. They want the skill set. So you're seeing a national increased trend in micro-credentialing and certifications and those kinds of things, right? And then finally, in the workplace, we want to be able to hire people into these businesses that grow with the job. We want to be able to mentor them. We don't want to micromanage them by any means. We want to give those kids the encouragement to really go for new ideas and innovations in the business. And at the farm level, we talk about this in beef a lot. As young people go back to the farm, I warn them, I say, you know, if your dad is my age, he sees you as, yes, you're his son or daughter, but you're also an employee. And that's going to be hard for you because you have a 4-year degree in education and a lot of aspiration. So be sure and sit with them at the table and help them understand that you don't want to be micromanaged, but you want to be a partner, that you have a lot to learn, that you're willing to learn it, you want to grow in the job, but I want to be treated as a partner, just not an employee, right? And then convince them to allow you to embrace and bring in the entrepreneurism and the technology that you are really innate at and that maybe somebody in my age group is not. So those are the kids I work with, right? And if we pay attention to those things, I think we beat the odds, we win the lottery, right? And we save this industry that represents 17% of the gross domestic, or the agriculture receipts in the United States, and we accomplish our goals. I ran out of time, didn't I? All right. Thank you for your time.